Back in 2015, I was working as a live-in home health aide for a wealthy family. It was just me and my patient living in a very nice condo in a quiet neighborhood on a golf course. We were the youngest people who lived there. I was 27 at the time. My patient was a 21-year-old male with Asperger's, SPD, and BPD, and some substance abuse problems. He had recently got into some trouble and been legally declared incompetent. We will call him Jake. Jake was a nice kid, but he had severe emotional issues and almost no social awareness, compounded by the refusal to take prescribed medication, which worked incredibly well when he took it, and drug abuse. He was taken advantage of a lot because of the crowd that he hung around with. Right before I moved in, 6 friends came to hang out with Jake one day and ended up staying for 2 weeks, draining Jake's bank account and various drugs, meth, coke, MDMA, weed, and absolutely trashing the condo. Jake was lonely, and he never said no to people. He wanted them to like him. Honestly, I think Jake was 14 to 15 years old mentally. I think he turned to drugs to deal with depression and anxiety, and also to fit in with the people around him. He's much better now. It was a sweet gig. I was paid very well, lived in a nice condo rent-free, and basically just had to keep our house clean, keep food in the fridge, and make sure he took his medication. When I moved in, my boss, Jake's mother, warned me about a girl who occasionally stayed with her father, who was our downstairs neighbor. She told me that the girl's name was Amber, and that she looked younger, but she was 37 years old, tall, blonde, and very thin. She was right. She looked much younger, like 25-ish. She said Amber didn't have a car or a job, and that she was an addict who liked to use Jake. Amber's father had custody of her 2 children, and she would come visit the kids and stay for a few days a week. She said one day, Amber asked to borrow Jake's car for an hour, and ended up running off with it for 2 weeks. Amber was also one who introduced Jake to 6 friends who trashed the condo. She was bad news and was never allowed in the condo. She wanted me to call her immediately if Amber stopped by, or Jake went anywhere with her. After the theft, she put a GPS on Jake's car, and allegedly she could stop the engine. My boss made it clear that she didn't expect me to be a security guard, just to notify her things that were going on leading up to this event. I had a few run-ins with this Amber, and where I had to politely tell her that things like she was not allowed to come into the apartment. Jake could not take her to the store or anywhere. No, Jake couldn't go to a party at her boyfriend's house, etc. Amber was always spaced out, like she talked slow and seemed wide-eyed and off. She explained to me that she had been hit by a car while riding her bike recently, and complained that she was the one who ended up going to jail. I was like, how? Apparently she takes a lot of Xanax and was under the influence, so I think that explains the spaced out part. Anyway, she was never aggressive, but it was clear that she didn't like me, and often would say things like, Jake is his own person. He's a 21-year-old man. He doesn't need permission. And whenever she spoke to Jake, when we saw her at the gym or in a parking lot, she would be whispering to him, no doubt trying to manipulate him into giving her money or something. Anyway, on the incident, Jake was out of the state with his father, giving me a mini vacation. My best friend was staying over to spend a few days with me, and we were drinking PBR and watching RuPaul's Drag Race. It was like 11 p.m., and we hear a light knock at the door. I go investigate through the peephole and see it's Amber. I ignore her. She knocks louder, and about 30 seconds later, I watch her leave through the peephole and sit back down, telling my friend the situation. 5 minutes go by, and she's back. This time she's pounding on the door like a cop. I'm getting pissed because I'm off work, and I don't want to deal with her crazy, especially when my friend is over. So I say nothing and go back to the couch. She knocks like a normal person and starts saying, "Hello, Jake? OP? I need some help. Hello?" I still don't answer. Then I hear her try to open the door. It's locked. Anyways, I'm a habitual door locker, and this enraged her or something, and she starts screaming and pounding on the door nonstop. I get up and look through the peephole again, and she looks like a demon. Her pupils were huge, and I think she was on something. She looked crazy. Her hair was tangled and wild, and she was sweating and angry. Looking back, I'll never forget those wide pupils looking at me through an evil glare. I asked her through the door what she wants, and she said she needs to speak with Jake right now. He owes her money, and she needs a ride to her boyfriend's house right now. I tell her Jake isn't home, and then she asks me if I will take her. I tell her no. I've been drinking and I'm going to bed. She let out a frustrated scream, punched the door, and left. My friend and I went to the bed shortly after. Didn't hear from her again after that. The next morning, we're getting ready to leave to go to breakfast. I hear a knock like a policeman's knock at the door. You know the sound. I look through the peephole expecting to see Amber, but this time, it's an actual cop. I open my door and see my parking lot is full of police. There's a van marked crime scene unit, and an ambulance. I honestly assume Amber overdosed or something. The cop wants to speak to me if I heard anything strange last night. I tell him about my encounter with Amber, and ask if she's okay. He tells me she's in custody for the murder of her father. Does Jake own a crossbow, and is it missing? Yes, and yes. It's been missing for weeks. He says I need to speak with some detectives at the station. So, I don't know if she came to my door before and after she murdered her father, with a fucking crossbow, like she's Tyrion Lannister or something. But the detective told me that his theory was that she was a heroin addict, and she was on withdrawal, and needed to get to her boyfriend's for more dope. She tried to get Jake to drive her, and when that didn't work, she asked her father, who refused. This is what went down. They argued. Other neighbors heard that. She killed him with a stolen crossbow, and stole his truck. She only got a mile away before she was signaled to pull over. She led the cops in a high-speed chase over the span of 2 counties, before she finally lost control and crashed. The cops were only pulling her over on suspicion of drinking and driving. But when they went to speak to her, she told them that she was speeding because she needed to check on her dad. She thinks someone stabbed him. They asked her why she thought that, and she wouldn't answer. They sent police for a welfare check, and they found him before her son did. So, that was the time my crazy drug addict neighbor murdered her father, with my patient's crossbow. Let's never meet again. So, this happened when I was around 10. Just starting to stay home by myself. There was this lady going around mine and other nearby neighborhoods, and she was a door-to-door salesman, selling children's books. Anyways, the thing is, she would always ask you to use your bathroom. If you let her, she would not leave your house. Like, you can beg and bribe and threaten, and she wouldn't leave. Anyways, the news found out pretty quickly, and our neighborhood put out pictures of her so the inhabitants would know who she was. One day, my mom left, and I was home on my own. My mom had always told me not to open the door for anyone, but I would always look and see who it was. You know, if you were dropping off a package or whatnot. So this particular day, the children's book lady knocked at my door. My 10-year-old self was petrified, and I called my mom first thing. She knocks a few times, but she didn't leave. She peered in the windows by my front door, and I walked her around the house a little bit. Right when I was about to call the cops, she left, and I've never been more scared in my life. So, creepy children's book lady, let's not meet. Here's a brief background. I used to work at a fast food restaurant, and would do the graveyard shift every weekend. After every shift at 5 a.m., I would walk to the train station and catch the train home. Usually by then, there are typical drunk people and your morning crazies. Usually I'd sit in the first seat on the train so that I could take a moderately comfortable nap on my 1-hour journey home. But that day, I wasn't super tired, and decided to take a window seat to watch the sunrise. After a while, I had noticed the guy sitting behind me talking to himself, so I had turned off my music to listen to what he was saying. I always do this because I listen to a lot of crime podcasts, not that anything usually happens. In the beginning, I could hardly hear what he was saying, but as the train ride went on, the louder he got. Halfway through, I heard him say, "This bitch is ignoring me." And with that, I assumed he was talking about someone he was texting or something. But then I could hear the creaking of his seat as he moved forward and right next to my ear and said, "You look pretty." All I could do is turn my head and look out the window while humming a tune, pretending that my music is still on. After that, he leaned back into his seat and kept cussing me out. It was getting closer to my stop, and I was getting increasingly worried, as this man hadn't stopped cussing at me since he leaned back into his seat. I decided to go on with my normal routine of calling my mom, so she can come get me from the train station. Since I speak another language, it was easy for me to explain what had happened, and to ask if that she could hurry, and that she would be there in time for my train. There was just one more stop left before mine, and the man who was still in the seat behind me had become increasingly more aggressive. That I had ignored him. This time he was saying things like, "She has pretty fingers. I can't wait for her to get off the train," and "I'll teach you not to ignore me." I had truly hoped that he would have gotten off at the stop before mine, but that didn't happen. While we pulled into the last station on the line, I slowly gathered my things and started to get up as the door opened. I had made the mistake to glance behind me. As I was getting off, I saw the man holding massive bolt cutters. As soon as he saw me, he yelled, "I'll cut your fingers, you bitch!" and began to chase after me. Luckily, as soon as I ran up the stairs, the man had stopped the chase to catch his breath. I ran across the platform and saw the man once again. He just pointed and laughed. So, guy with the red bolt cutters who wanted my fingers, let's not meet ever again. I really am at a loss for what happened here, but it all seemed too weird to me. Maybe it's not connected at all, or I was just being paranoid, but you decide. My boyfriend, 23, and I, 23 female, had to go to Atlanta this weekend, following social distancing. We weren't in the heart of the city, but a little outside of it. We'd been here many times before, and it's always been safe for us. We might have been a little too naive. We got to the hotel around 7 p.m. My boyfriend wanted to take a shower, so I said I would go to the McDonald's drive-thru. I went to the McDonald's by myself at 8 p.m. and was back at around 8:15. The hotel we're staying in was one next to the mall strip of restaurants and shops. The hotel we're staying in is one right next to a mall and strip of restaurants and shops, but somehow still is a little secluded. The front faces a big empty lot, and the back is a freight shipping place. It's a Meredith, by the way, just to give an idea of the place. When I was walking in, I noticed two guys in the empty parking lot across the street, with no car in sight. Weird, but I was already in the front of the store, so I wasn't nervous. We were just eating and watching TV, and around 10 p.m., I heard an alarm. I said to my boyfriend, "Someone must have gone out of the emergency exit," and he looked around and saw that it was our car alarm going off. The key was on the side table the whole time, so we didn't accidentally press it. He said he was going to turn off the alarm since it wasn't working through the window. I didn't think anything of this. Right when he left, I had an overwhelming feeling of dread and anxiety. It hit me like a train. I immediately got up and locked the deadbolt. I laughed at myself for doing this and saying I was paranoid. I then went to look out the window to check if he turned it off, and was on his way up so I can get ready to unlock the deadbolt. When I looked out, I saw a guy in the empty parking lot, but only one now. I called my boyfriend and said, "Don't go outside. Just click it from the lobby. There's someone in the empty parking lot." He said I was paranoid, but he always goes along for my peace of mind. All of a sudden, I heard a light knock. I thought it was my boyfriend, but I'm not an idiot. I always look through the peephole, and I'm so glad I did. I looked through and my heart sank. It was a man staring straight through the peephole, like he was trying to look in. That alone could have given me a heart attack, especially because it's a fisheye, so it looked huge. He had a dark beard and a sweatshirt with a hood, either black or navy blue. Obviously, I was not opening the door. I wanted to call my boyfriend, but I didn't want the man to know I was in my room. I went into the bathroom, called my boyfriend, and whispered, "Someone's at the door. Please come back." The knock started getting louder and louder. He didn't say anything though. Maybe because it was late, or maybe he was drunk and had the wrong room. Then silence. I wanted to know if he was still there, but I dreaded the heart drop if I saw him in the damn fisheye peephole again. My legs were like lead walking over. To my surprise, he was gone. Not even 10 seconds later, frantic knocking that made my heart drop again. But then I heard my boyfriend's voice, and I didn't care if the guy came back. I wouldn't lock him out. I opened the door, and he said, right when he turned into the hallway, before he can even say anything, the man booked it down the fire exit. Maybe the two things weren't related at all, but it seemed way too weird and eerie to me. We told the front desk the next morning what had happened, but since it was all so odd and potentially not connected, we didn't call the cops or anything. We have left though, and are back home thankfully. Scary man in the fisheye peephole. Let's never meet. Hi everyone. I will try to keep this as concise as possible, while still delving into necessary details. I joined Reddit just yesterday to tell the story, because I'm looking for answers to the terrifying events that have altered my daily routine tremendously, as I'm currently living in fear. This happened in the span of 2 days, 5 days ago. I'm not sure if these events are connected, however I'm convinced they are. I'm an 18-year-old male, 6'1", 190 pounds. I live in Seattle, and I work at a local grocery store, as my father insisted on me getting a job amidst coronavirus. And grocery stores are the few places hiring nowadays. Anyways, I work at 5 a.m. and wake up around 4 a.m. I don't mind it because I get off early. It's still dark when I arrive at the store, and I always have to call the store and ask for a produce worker to let me in. As I was walking up to the door, I see an average-looking man, probably late 30s. He doesn't work in my store, and clearly he was tweaking out, moving around in crazy motions, on meth or something. It was common to find needles in the bathrooms of the store. As I was waiting for the front door to open, he was facing me about 8 feet away, not looking at me, but past me. He was chatting, some weird satanic shit. Something like, "Satan will come, Satan knows." He kept repeating those lines. I was just standing at the door like, what the fuck is this dude on? Someone just let me inside already. Nothing else strange happened that workday, and I got off at 9 a.m., as I only worked a 4-hour shift that day. As I'm driving home, I get a call, and the ID said it was from a nearby city. I answer, and I literally just hear a guy breathing. I'm just sitting there thinking this is some corny prank. Since the audio was playing through the speakers in my car, his breathing was amplified. I'm not sure if it was intentional. I read one time that if someone keeps you on the phone for long enough, they can get your IP address. I'm not certain of this though. He then says my full name in a tone of question, but also in a weird, strange kind of excited way that made me feel extremely uneasy. This was very stupid of me to confirm it was, but I said, "Yeah, who is this?" And then he just pauses and hangs up. I realized a few hours later that he sounded exactly like the satanic dude from this morning, except sober. I get paranoid fairly easy, but this was a red flag that sent chills down my spine. I tried to call back and the number was, you guessed it, disconnected. The next day I arrive at work with no troubles and leave at 9 a.m. I get home at around 9:20 and I see my father's car in the driveway, as he's usually home at this time. The front door to my house was unlocked, I shouldn't think anything of this because my dad was home, right? I walk in, take off my shoes, and call out for my dad, because I had brought the melon. So before I explain this next part, you need to understand that many noises people hear are misidentified as something it is truly not, or their mind is playing games with them, or it's just the house making noises, etc. But there's a very specific noise that my parents' bed frame makes, because it's wood. When someone is rolling around in it, I know this sound very well because my room is right next to my parents', and my dad is an extremely light sleeper, and anytime I drop something or make a relatively loud noise, I can hear him rolling around in his bed because I disturbed him. Okay, continuing on. I call out for my dad as I'm walking up the stairs, and there's no response, only that noise of the bed frame moving. I later that day rolled around in the bed to confirm the noise I heard, and that you need a significant amount of weight on the bed in order to reproduce the sound. This was when I got scared as hell, because my dad wakes up very early, and there's no way he was taking a nap at 9:30 a.m. I'm already at the top of the stairs at this point, so I burst into the room and closed my door. I listen through our paper-thin walls, and I genuinely hear someone whispering, and then the springs release as if someone was sitting on the edge and stood up. If he was whispering, that means there could potentially be two people in my house, and I could be in real danger. I instinctually grabbed my dresser and dragged it to the front of my door. That thing weighs probably at least 150 pounds, and it took me a little while to drag it to the front of my door. My heart was pounding, and I was worried the intruders would catch on to what I was doing and break through my door before I had a chance to do it. I just slammed the dresser down in front of my door to not waste any more time. Nobody was getting through that door. I felt slightly more relaxed and called my dad. I started to get nervous because he didn't answer, and he sometimes went on a walk around the neighborhood at this time. Just as I tried to call him, I saw him walk up the street from out of my bedroom window and shouted that it wasn't safe for him to come into the house. At first he laughed it off and proceeded up the driveway, as nothing like this has ever happened. We live in a somewhat safe area. I repeated myself, but this time I screamed at him. Now he knew I was serious. He could see the fear in my eyes. He stepped back a few feet and asked what the hell was going on, and I felt like I didn't really have time to explain. I just told him to wait. Once I confirmed my father was safe, I called 911, and the intruders next to me must have heard it because one of them got off the phone and they ran downstairs. I was scared for my dad at this point because he was just right outside. I had moved the dresser again from my door, as I was in a panicked state. I left my room and ran downstairs to see nothing except for my dad, who was still confused at this point, and the back door was wide open. The cops got there about 12 minutes later and came up with nothing. No evidence of forced entry. Literally nothing. Besides the wide open back door and some mud tracks in the house, which really pissed me off. Could the man whispering been the man who was talking to Satan that other day? How did the man know my name on the phone? Could someone track you if they knew your phone number and full name? Were these people trying to abduct me? This only happened 5 days ago, and I've been scared ever since, worrying they might come back. I also have sleep paralysis and have gotten worse lately. If you have had it before, yeah, it fucking sucks. That's my story. I hope nothing like this happens to any of you. Thanks for listening. And to the satanic worshiper, let's never meet again. Two stories here. Second creeper story below this one. I'm 23 and female. I grew up in a rural area in Ontario. It was the kind of place where you never lock the doors, because you know everyone in town. The all too trusting small town mentality stayed with me once I moved to a bigger city for university. I got an apartment in a student area with a college nearby, and plenty of bars within walking distance. I lived with a guy friend, Rhodey. He was a few years older than me, from the same small town. I would go to the bars with friends on the weekends and stumble home by myself around 2 a.m. One night on my way home, my neighbor, Kyle, and I met in the hallway and both headed to our own places. He was also drunk, and so good looking. He said hello and invited me inside. I ended up staying the night with him. He was nice and it was a fun night, if not a little awkward. We didn't exchange numbers, and it didn't seem like we cared for anything to come of it, so I went home in the morning and that was that. Fast forward to 2 days later. I was asleep in my bed, and my roommate was half asleep on the couch with the TV on. He heard a sound that might have been the door creaking open, but he ignored it in his tired state. A few minutes later, he opens his eyes to see a naked man standing in front of him, lifeless and staring into his eyes. It was Kyle. Rhodey tried to talk to him and asked him what he was doing here, but he didn't respond. Rhodey ran into my room and said, Oddly moist, I think Kyle is here to see you. So I followed him into the living room and saw a completely naked Kyle staring at us with the most serious and concentrated eyes I'd ever seen. I tried to talk to him and asked him to leave, but once again he didn't respond. Instead, he went to our kitchen and opened the fridge. He proceeded to take out butter and started smearing it all over his face and chest, saying nothing, and still with a complete serious look on his face. Rhodey and I ran into the bedroom to talk about what to do. While we're in my room, Kyle walked down the dark hallway that led to us and stood in the dark right before the light of the room could reach him. All you could see was his silhouette, and he started whispering, "Hi, oddly moist. Hi, oddly moist," repeatedly. Rhodey and I ended up calling the police and staying in the room until they came and took him back to his house. They said he must have been on drugs, but probably wasn't a threat. I agreed and didn't think he was a threat, but I didn't sleep well that night, knowing that he was a thin wall away from us in his apartment. I added this in the comments, but I thought it's relevant to mention. I talked to Kyle about a week later, and he had no memory of doing this, but he did call 911 on himself and got an ambulance to the hospital the next morning because he had severe sunstrokes. So, it was likely sunstroke-induced delirium. He's okay now, thankfully. Story 2. We forgot to lock our doors another time. I was at work and Rhodey was at home. I got a text from him saying, "Please get home. Someone is here, and I think you must know them because I don't." So I took an early lunch and came home to see what was going on. There was a man with greasy black hair, so long it nearly reached his elbows, and he was pacing back and forth in our living room. Before I even got a chance to speak to him, I realized he was not mentally present. He would alternate between screaming at the top of his lungs like he was being murdered, and then he would cry and say things like, "I can feel the pain and suffering of everyone in the world. I hear the voices of the people and tormented in my brain begging me to help them. I can't stand this suffering. Nobody understands my powers and abilities to know what everyone is thinking." I would chime in and politely ask, "Do you know where you are?" Or, "What's your address? I can help you get home." And then he would scream at us because this was his house and he wasn't leaving, and he wanted us to stop judging him. After about 10 minutes of him rambling and pacing, he said his address to us, which was actually a neighboring apartment where Kyle lives. I knew Kyle had a roommate that I met, John, but apparently this was their third roommate. I went to his door and knocked, and thankfully, the roommate John opened the door and came to retrieve the rambling man. Later that night, John knocked on our door, and I opened it to see him holding a bottle of wine. He wanted to thank us for handling the situation well and making sure he got home. Apparently the man had recently been to the mental hospital and left on his own accord and walked into the wrong apartment. His parents came and got him, and he's back in the hospital, safe and sound.
This might have been the scariest day of my life, and I have had nightmares about it ever since it happened. For a little backstory, I am a 35-year-old single mother of two, both girls, and the story took place around 10 months after they were born, back in 2010. They are also twins but not identical, and their father had just passed away a few months after before they were born. I didn't have any family to live with at the time, and my so-called friends were more focused on parties and themselves. We were living in El Paso, Texas at the time, and I was barely able to make ends meet. I worked 2 full-time jobs, and at time would have to bring my daughters with me to work on the first job in the mornings if I couldn't get a babysitter. Luckily, the store owner was a very nice old man and had his own grandchildren stay there as well, in his back office at times. If you can imagine the building in your head, it looks like a standard office building in a shopping strip. There were not many other buildings around besides a bar across the street and a dental office next door that had been out of business for a long time. Anyways, I would be in front of this office answering phones and setting up appointments. We really didn't have a lot of customers that would come into our location, as most of the time it was done over the phone or email. I remember that day in my head very clearly though. My little ones had just went down for their nap with the other little girls that were there for the day. The only person in the building was myself and the office owner. His personal office was in the room directly across from where the children would be, so he would keep an eye on them most of the time, unless they ran out to me and needed something. I would also go check on them when the phones were not going off or when I would use the bathroom. So the store owner, who we will call Richard, had said that he was going to go across the street real quick to get some coffees and asked if I wanted one. I'm not a big coffee drinker, so I said no. I remember asking how the girls were, and Richard said they were all sleeping like angels, as they usually did around that time. A few minutes had passed and I was so busy with my work on the computer at the time, I hadn't realized just how much time had actually gone by. When I looked at the clock, it had already been 45 minutes since he left. The Starbucks that we would go to was only a 2-minute drive away. I tried to call him, but when I did, his phone went off in his office. I thought for a second that maybe he has actually come inside and I didn't notice him. So I walked to the back office, only to find his phone on his desk, as well as his wallet. At that point, I was thinking, what the hell? That's really strange. I decided to check on the girls, as they should just be about ready for something to eat by then, and shouldn't be taking such long naps. When I opened the door, I noticed that they were all asleep, so I went a little closer and my heart dropped. I counted 1, 2, only 2 hands. I knew one of them was my daughter Jessica at first, and the other one had a blanket over her head. I ran over to pull it back to see that it wasn't my other daughter. It was his granddaughter. Now I have picked both girls up with each arm and started to run around the building, looking for my other daughter. But she was nowhere to be found. I looked outside and still nothing. But as I was freaking out, Richard's car pulled into the parking lot. He must have seen my face in full shock and panic mode, and he ran out of the car and over to me. The only words I got out of my mouth were, "Can't find her, please." Richard's face seemed to relax a bit after I said that and went back to his car. When he opened the door and I saw little feet kicking in the back car seat, I almost cried. Richard said that he had picked up my daughter thinking it was his granddaughter and put her in the back seat. He said he only realized it wasn't her when he was driving back and got a flat tire. He didn't have his phone on him, so he couldn't call AAA and had to flag someone down to help him. He went back to check on her and noticed it wasn't his granddaughter. Nothing else really happened after that, and I know it's not the most scary story in the world, but it did freak me out to my core, and it is still the scariest experience that has ever happened to me.
Hey guys, I want to thank you for listening. If you haven't yet, please consider clicking that subscribe button and bell icon to get notified of all future videos. I try to post around 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if you have a story you'd like featured on the channel, head over to my subreddit, r/GenSenOfficial. And if you want early access to my videos, head over to my Patreon, where only $1 a month gets you that and also some fun other perks. I've also got merch now over on Spreadshirt, and I as well offer all my videos on my podcast. That can be found on all major podcast services. All my links will be located in the description field below. I hope everyone has a good night. And make sure to subscribe to the guest narrator today, Lucid Lupus. He's a good friend of mine, and I think his narrations are on point. He also does some really cool creepypasta narrations and just has this generally cool voice. Alright, that's about it. Good night, guys, and keep it spooky.